Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to the NeuroGrowth Podcast, where we talk and we're exploring all things neurodiverse. So, my name is Justin. If you don't know, if you've not joined before, I'm Justin Joseph, and today we're joined by Cole Andrew, and so I'm really excited for today, because I'm really keen to hear what Cole's going to bring and talk a little bit about his experiences, his journey. I'm not going to say too much because I really want Cole to introduce himself as well. But I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about Cole. And if there's anything I miss, Cole, please jump in and let me know.
Yeah,
Okay?
sure, we'll do.
So
It's great
Cole,
to be here.
yeah, thanks so much for being on. It's really great having you. And so Cole is a seasoned coach. He's a mentor, and Cole is guiding people to unlock their potential and to develop substantial improvement in education, workplaces, and personal development. So his career has spanned 35 years, partnering with education, which includes learners, parents, teachers, and school leaders, to support them with unlocking their potential and refining leadership practice, and also to develop substantial improvement in education and life. Cole has a wide-ranging professional and personal background in supporting people with special educational needs and disability, attachment and trauma difficulties, and neurodiversity as well. So, how was that? Does that
That sounds very good. What I would add to that, and in my thoughts and reflections on this, is that there's a grand sounding professional overview, but running alongside that has been this consistent pattern of filling the odd one out. So it's almost like there's two personality traits, two sides of the same coin, coexisting together throughout that. And what you've described is how a lot of people have viewed me and seen me, and that's the kind of feedback I get, which is great. But also, if we're being truly authentic in this podcast today, I feel it's only fair to say, the reality of that masking has coexisted as well along the whole journey.
Yeah, and I think that's something I'd be really keen to hear about with your journey, especially as well. But yeah, I thought it might be quite good actually if we could start with that. Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, and your journey with neurodiversity, your experiences, because I know we're looking at within the educational setting, experience working in the educational setting with staff. And yeah, like I said, I'm really excited to hear about your experiences with that. So yeah, maybe you could just tell the listeners and the viewers a little bit more about who you are, yourself, and your journey, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So a very potted history of life. It is I was brought up in the care system in the 70s, lived in a children's home for a while, dotted around foster placements, and ended up being cared for long term by my grandparents. So I just give that very potted history because a lot of the issues, both strengths and weaknesses, but issues that I feel I may have struggled with over the years, I've often attributed to what they now call childhood ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And I've had to wrestle over the years with that. Some of the symptoms, if you like, such as processing information, you could attribute to hypervigilance, and hypervigilance linked to a trauma. So a lot of my self-awareness for many years was more linked to that than actually awareness that I was actually neurodivergent. And a huge irony in all of this is that I was a specialist teacher. I did advanced training at Birmingham University to become a specialist teacher. And despite supporting children with neurodiversity and working with parents with neurodivergent thinking, I didn't realise myself that I was a neurodivergent thinker until many years later, and even the colleagues that I worked with in special schools who you might have thought, well, they might have noticed and said something. That didn't happen for many years, and so it's been an interesting journey of self-awareness. And as you know, Justin, we've become good friends, and you encouraged me on the journey with becoming a counsellor, or training to be a counsellor, and that part of my journey in itself has been incredibly helpful in unpicking that sense of self-awareness, and just reflecting back over my life and where that awareness was maybe lacking, both within myself but actually in the people around me. So one thing that, you know, if I could change anything, I wish there'd be more open conversations with my colleagues, my friends, with my own self-reflective practice much earlier in my career and my life. So yeah, so that was that. And then I'd also like to point out positives in this as well. So there were unexpected advantages, I think, to discovering that I had a neurodivergent brain, and actually to be able to celebrate some of the things that I've achieved in my career, and particularly when you look back, when you get to my older age. Justin, you're a lot younger than me. When you get to my older age, in your mid-50s, you reflect more. And you start to notice patterns. So there's a consistent pattern throughout my whole life, both as a teenage friend, as a young teacher, as a leader in schools, as a self-employed person, a consistent pattern of people saying to me things like, for example, "Cole, you're easy to listen to. Not quite sure why, but we could listen to you all day." I don't think that's just to do with my tone of voice. Things like, "You're really helpful with problem solving." You know, so I always remember, you know, my teenage friends saying, "Oh, can you go and talk to the teacher for me?" You know, to resolve an issue or a problem that they were having at school, or I'd just come up with what people now describe as out of the box thinking. Well, why don't you just do this? You know, so for example, when I was a head teacher in Blackpool, and the school building was really not fit for purpose, needed rebuilding at a time when local authorities don't have much money. Well, long story cut short, I got £2.5 million out of the council to fund a rebuild and a refurbishment of the school building at a time when everyone around me said, "Well, that's not possible. Why would you even try?" Well, why can't you? Why can't I just go and talk to a counsellor on the education committee and get them to come and visit the school? Why can't we do that, for example? So that kind of thinking, that neurodivergent thinking, is a huge positive in life, and I don't think we celebrate that enough. Now, I didn't know, of course, for many years that I was neurodivergent, but I knew this was a character trait that had come from somewhere, you know, some kind of gift. So awareness of what your neurodivergence is bringing to the table is really important, both on a personal level, in your personalising relationships, but also within your career. Hyperfocus, you know, so I also have a diagnosis of ADHD now, and your ability to hyperfocus is often labelled as a challenge.
Yes, yeah, it is.
You know, now the challenge for me is not the hyperfocus itself; it's actually the ability to get to that point where it starts.
Yeah.
So if I could be hyper-focused the moment I start work at 9 a.m, that'd be fantastic. That'd be awesome. But sadly, you know, it might come at 6 o'clock at night. However, when it's there and you can tap into it and align that with my first point around, you know, out of the box thinking, my goodness, the work that you can do, and then that work that's produced is viewed by your colleagues with such high esteem. What might have frustrated them is how long it took you to get there in producing it, but the quality of the work can be phenomenal, because you've reflected on issues, you've problem solved, you've come up with 1,001 solutions for a school action plan, or to a problem solving issue, that a parent's struggling with their child, or whatever the issue has been in my career. That creative thinking and hyper focus is a superpower.
Yeah.
So let's acknowledge it as that, and actually, as an individual person who may struggle with a sense of shame around some of the things, some of the consequences. I think we'll come on to this when you ask some further questions later, but there's a sense of shame that can come with neurodiversity because of the message, the feedback, both intentional or otherwise, from friendships, from social situations, from colleagues, just that continuous pattern of, oh, I've messed up, I failed, I didn't, you didn't, you were lazy, you could have. Even without, unintentionally, without being unkind to your partners, oh, you've forgotten again. You've lost your keys again. We're late again. Okay, right. So this builds up that sense of shame, which I wasn't aware of, until I went on this journey of counselling and started to unpick some of these issues from that perspective. But it sits there as an invisible, the flip side of the coin that I alluded to earlier. It sits there, and then it can impede and actually, ironically, have an increase the impact of that tendency to prevaricate and delay, and struggle to know how to start, because subconsciously that body of evidence around shame, or I'm likely to be late again, or I'm likely to not quite hit the mark, and almost paralyze you psychologically. And I think that's been a significant factor in my life. And then on a personal level, I think in terms of support from the NHS, that has been viewed as anxiety and depression, as opposed to a potential symptom or trait of ADHD. So when I say I missed it, my colleagues missed it, nobody said anything, nobody hinted at even medical professionals meeting with me. Didn't have, for whatever reason, the awareness to ask the question, oh, I wonder if this is a sign and symptom of neurodivergent brain, as opposed to, and of course then the treatment pathways are then very different. And then you wonder after a number of years, why am I still struggling with depression? The word depression's not in my vocabulary anymore, because I now know that it wasn't that.
Yeah, like that. No, that's really good points then. And there's so many things that you shared there, Cole. My mind is just pinging with things, and especially when you spoke about it being a superpower, because even as you were speaking about it, that's the word that was coming to my mind, was the superpower, the aspect. And I know sometimes for some, it can be quite a cliche thing, and it might not feel like that. But I think, like you're saying, with the awareness, the moment you have that awareness, and you can, in an ideal world, it would be great, we can tap into, like you're saying, I wish I could tap into that hyper focus when I need it. But I think when you have that awareness, like you're saying, this isn't depression, this isn't that I'm lazy. When you're able to be, to link it and know what you're linking it to, I think, like you're saying, it really can help reduce that shame there, but also gives you the ability to work towards, right, how can I tap into this more? But first you have to almost you have to be able to see it, if that makes sense. You have to be able to know what. When you were speaking about your time as a head teacher, especially, because like you said, when you look back, there's elements there where you can see, you didn't have the diagnosis, but you were picking up on certain neurodivergent traits. And obviously at the time, like you said, you wasn't aware of that. As a head teacher, especially working with staff, how How did you find that in terms of like, was it on your radar about neurodivergent stuff within the school? Was it mainly focused on with the children as being sort of like as a focus for day to day, or like, I'm just wondering, like, was that something that was on your radar as a head teacher in terms of the staff beneath you, so to speak?
I'd like to say, yeah, Justin, absolutely, yes. I was the model of practice as an employer of neurodivergent staff. But my reflection would be that sadly, no. I think we were so focused on what children needed. And I don't want to shirk responsibility in this, but I do think the English education system in particular is so focused on progress and outcomes and narrow measures of success. And I'm aware that I do school evaluation work, so there's a sense of hypocrisy in all of this. But my own practice in supporting schools has evolved massively on this journey. But when I was a head teacher, we're going back over a decade now, the awareness that was there, of course, and we would call ourselves an inclusive school, an inclusive environment, and the staff generally did say they felt supported and good relationships. But was there a strategic and in-depth understanding of how we support one another as neurodivergent adults working together? The answer is no. Even in a special school environment, and I think, I don't know what the statistics are around this, but my observation would be that there's a high percentage of neurodivergent teachers and leaders in special school settings. And there might be reasons for that. I suspect one of the reasons is hyper-empathy. Very empathic people, but also were people that tend to have struggled with education in one way or another, with or without diagnoses. So we've overcome barriers to our own education, and then we want to help others do the same. That's my sense there. So as a head teacher, and the biggest challenge here is the systems that you're expected to work with around performance are very inflexible. In some ways really clear, so typically in schools there's been a system called capability. So you have appraisal and you have a capability process. So appraisal targets set annually, review them at the end of the year, and then there's a whole set of standards that you hold teachers to, teacher standards, which in and of themselves they all make sense when you read them, and they've been approved by the unions and so on. But if someone's not performing or perceived to be performing in line with the standards, for example, submitting your paperwork on time, getting your lesson plans done, and submitted for review by the curriculum leader or whatever it is, or showing up for meetings on time, or getting the end of year children's reports written by the deadline, things like this. And if there's a consistent pattern of failing to hit these deadlines, we're back to that combination of shame, but the perception that you're ... lazy, incompetent, and so on. So the capability framework as a neurodivergent leader in some ways was quite comforting, because there's a clear process. This is how I deal with this. I follow step 1, step 2, step 3. In fact, I have to follow it, because if I'm ever challenged on have I followed the due process by a union rep, by a legal process, by a tribunal at some point in the future, the top question that will be asked is, have I followed the policy? Well, the policy says, I tell you informally that I've got concerns, and it's ironic, that word informal, because it's actually formal, but it's listed in the policy as an informal conversation that is then logged in writing. If I don't see an improvement, I'm going to put you on short-term targets. I'm going to give you targets to improve over 6 weeks. If you haven't improved after 6 weeks, there's a strong possibility that I'll then have the right to dismiss you. Now, I've taken a couple of staff through that process over the years, and in one case, it felt morally and ethically right for other reasons, but in another case, there wasn't a diagnosis, but on reflection, I wish I had been more curious. And curiosity, I think, is really key there. I think to be curious rather than come to conclusions in all aspects of life. But to ask the question, so I can reflect on one person I worked with years ago, and this didn't go to capability, but it's an example of where this may have gone right by chance or rather than anything else. And it was a it was a teacher who all her colleagues were complaining about her. Oh, she's not good enough. She's not lazy. She never shows up for meetings on time. She's really frustrating to work with, and so on and so on and so on. So I met with her, and we had a conversation. Long story cut short, I referred her to counselling and chose to pay for counselling through the school budget. And she came back to me a few weeks later, and she was like a different person.
Oh, wow.
And two things had come out of it. One was nothing to do with neurodivergence, but there was a close link to her pattern of being late and the sad loss of her first husband and the circumstances in which that had happened. So there's a very personal story there that then allowed everyone to be empathetic and understand the underlying reasons. And ironically, in special schools, we're very good at asking the question, where does a child's behaviours come from?
Yeah.
And you'll be familiar with the Freud iceberg exercise. So I've used that in school for years. Okay, what's going on above the surface of the water? Like the tip of an iceberg. Actually, let's be curious about what's going on underneath the surface of the water. For a child with neurodiversity, so typically communication difficulties, miscued social miscues, etc., physical sensory regulation problems. How often have I asked that question about other adults that I work with? I'm ashamed to say not often enough. So back to the story, underlying the surface of this with this particular teacher was an undiagnosed pattern of symptoms around neurodivergent thinking. So I'm pleased to say she's now still flourishing in her career, and this was about 25 years ago. So as was one time when I got it right, but it wasn't intentionally in my mind, I'm doing the right thing for a neurodivergent person. It just happened to flow out like that. Whereas in other parts of my career, and particularly when I was a head teacher in my second headship in the north of England, I do think that there was one particular adult that we could have been more curious in the way that I had been with that other teacher in another setting. So the systems, I think, can assume malintent. That's how I'd summarise that, rather than ask the questions about what's happening underneath the surface. So I think that's both the current reality, but maybe a challenge to us. And in my work with leaders now that I'm a coach coaching leaders in schools, and in fact I use a coaching model more than anything else now, because the coaching model itself seeks to be more curious than to reach conclusions too soon.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that as well, like you said about being curious. So does it feel fair to say that? And I know obviously it's hard to say because we don't know what goes on in every school, in England. But do you feel like, in terms of the education system, there's a gap there in terms of being more curious with the staff? And I guess in a way this comes, it kind of links in a little bit for me with like reasonable adjustments as like a little side part. But before we get to that part, it feels like we're missing that main step, which is the curiosity, like with the staff, rather than, we're very quick with children, which is great. We're supporting children. We're supporting them with understanding barriers or understanding differences there and how we can meet those. But it feels like actually that's potentially missing more with staff. Does that feel fair to say?
I would say that. I would just take the opportunity just to pause for a moment on one thing you said there.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a lot of school classrooms where what you've described doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah.
So that's maybe another podcast conversation around
definitely.
Teachers' training and understanding of neurodiversity. However, in most classrooms that I visit, I do see certainly an improvement in practice in that curiosity for sure. But I also need to be conscious that maybe the schools I'm being invited to are maybe more thinking like that anyway. But yes, so back to your point. Yes, I do think there's a gap in how we support children and think about children, and actually how we then support adults. And I think the gap for me, I think, actually, is what's driving our motivation. Systems and processes and measurable outcomes can drive our decisions as leaders. And I guess this could be true in any setting, even beyond education, but certainly my career. So you come across leaders who are driven by we need to get the right results in the SATs tests and in the GCSEs, and of course we do want to improve outcomes for children. Of course we do. And of course, Ofsted is a significant factor in this. We've got to get the expected and strong and the exemplary grades that you can now get. But the gap for me is the word principles. Okay. So if I use another analogy, as a teacher in a classroom, you can present a child with an activity to keep them busy. For example, let's a child in reception class, age 4 or 5. Let's build something with Lego bricks. Let's build a tower with Lego bricks, and the child enjoys that activity, or they don't enjoy it. I've planned this activity. We're going to do it, and they didn't enjoy it. What are the outcomes from that? They may or may not have enjoyed it. Have they learnt anything? Now, there's an underlying principle that a teacher should be thinking, actually, what do I want a child to learn in this process? I want them to recognise colours, the difference between blue, red, green, and so on. I want them to be able to start counting 1, 2, 3, okay, two learning objectives. Now I know the principle, the underlying principle for this activity. So the principle should drive the activity and the response rather than the activity itself. So if we come back to how we support our colleagues, the capability process is meant to be a helpful process to unpick the underlying reasons why a member of staff is struggling to achieve the expectations that have been mapped out in some kind of framework. Okay. But actually, if we go to principles first, a key principle of curiosity might help us ask the right questions to unpick what are the barriers. So in the code of practice for children, there's a SEND code of practice, special needs code of practice, that drives how teachers should react to children in classrooms. And it's roughly this. What are their strengths? What are their needs? What are the barriers to achieving? What provision do we need to put into place to help them overcome the barriers? And then what outcomes are we looking for? If you apply that same process to a neurodivergent member of staff, maybe they haven't got a diagnosis, they're not showing up for meetings on time, they're not submitting their paperwork on time, they don't appear to be planning the lessons, and yet, strangely enough, the lessons they deliver seem quite enjoyable to the children. This is a typical pattern. Are we asking the same questions? What are their strengths? What are their needs? oh, well, we sent them to the occupational health appointment, and they've come out with a list of reasonable adjustments or not, but even the occupational health haven't necessarily been curious enough about the neurodivergence. What are the barriers? So, for example, one strategy to helping staff overcome barriers is that, I'd like you to produce lesson plans. What format you use to produce those lesson plans, you decide. I did do this in one school, whereas for many years in my career, I dictated the formats because I was very good at producing paperwork, systems and processes. But actually, if I just say to them, actually, the underlying principle of a good lesson plan is that you start with the child's needs, the barriers. You decide what you want them to learn, and then choose an activity that aligns with that, and then evaluate how that lesson went. How you log that is entirely up to you. Now, for a neurodivergent person, that's really empowering, because I can figure that out for myself, either by doing mind mapping. I'll use a mind mapping tool to produce my lesson plan. I'm not constrained and having this format staring at me on the screen at 7 o'clock at night, and I'm paralysed because I'm tired. I haven't got the hyper focus, but I know I've got this lesson plan to do for next Monday or whatever it is. Whereas if I'm just empowered to think about, okay, what does a child need? Without even put pen to paper, what does a child need? What about, okay, all right, he really enjoys this. I want him to learn his number bonds to 10. He loves trains. Okay, so we'll do an activity with trains and whereas now teachers are required to follow very rigid systems and processes, lesson plans that have been predefined, little flexibility to adapt, and actually think differently, or allow that creative brain to kick in. Now, some schools have an ethos, a culture, where things like that do happen. And there are schools out there that do this really, really well. And it's really empowering and really effective. And there's a strong sense of collegiality, and staff get on well together. They feel valued. The pressure and the workload is no less than the school up the road, where everyone's feeling constrained by having to do things in a certain way.
Yeah.
And the irony is that both schools could get the same educational results. However, I take it a step further and say the schools that consistently achieve the best outcomes and the best results are the ones that have the healthiest flexible cultures, rather than the ones that have very rigid cultures. And I'm guessing that this conversation probably could be repeated in relation to any industry.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case.
That's true. Yeah.
Principles and culture and systems. So the underlying principles for a system should be considered before applying the system. For example, a capability process.
Yeah. No, I like that. That's really, you've touched on some really important and also very practical things as well. Like for those listening who are in the educational setting, in whether that's in schools or leadership roles, I think this is something that can be implemented in companies, organizations, not just the education, but it's really, you're touching on something that's really important actually, and often sadly missed. Like you're saying about the flexibility here is really key in being able to achieve good outcomes.
Yeah. And a really effective leader understands that leadership is not rigidity. It's the ability to form effective relationships and to empower people, and to actually figure out for each person and each group of people the best way of doing that. And that can be scary because you can't predict necessarily the pathway for that, but you can predict the principles. So you could there's a teaching strategy called backward chaining. So you could set an end goal and actually co-produce with your colleagues how to get there, or you can dictate the steps from the ground up. Now, either of those approaches could work, but the backward chaining process and the co-production is typically more effective.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. Because I tried, one of the things I've tried looking into as well, Cole, was around any sort of statistics or data with like educational settings with staff and neurodivergence. And I've got to be honest, I did struggle. There didn't seem to be too much. I did come across, though, an article that I wanted to share with you, because I think actually it does touch on some things that you've shared here. So this article was written by an ex-head teacher as well with ADHD, and called Chris Benson.
Yeah. So
within this article, he references a survey which was completed on the 31st of March 2026. So it's very, recent. So this was done in England, and it was by 8,692 staff to, answer the survey. So it was asking educators if they considered themselves to be neurodivergent, specifically looking at autism, ADHD, or dyslexia. Now, the top line figure is that 25% of teachers, they self-identify as neurodivergent. So he breaks this down even more. Within that, he said that the languages teachers were the least likely to identify themselves as neurodiverse. 62% of them said no outright. The arts and design and technology were the most likely to say they were neurodivergent. 33% said yes, 22% said they're not sure. Some 34% of the teachers in their 20s, they self-identify as neurodivergent. The figure then, though, falls to 27% among those in their 30s and 22% in their 40s, 18% among teachers in their 50s and above. So as the age is getting older, the percentage is falling. So NHS Cambridge University, the hospital, they estimate that 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent, which would put teachers higher than the general population. However, with lots of other contextual factors to consider, it says here, like awareness of neurodiversity among teachers, like you mentioned a bit earlier on, it's hard to draw strong conclusions. But Chris Benson, he asks, if neuro-inclusion is to mean anything for the children in our schools, does it not need to start at the top rather than be retrofitted from below? So again, links in, I think, to what you were saying about, if we can focus, and like you said, there's areas here where some teachers in some schools, the awareness would ideally need to be increased to be able to provide better support to our young people. But would that help actually if we change from what Chris Benson is saying, if we changed our view rather than having sort of like a bottom-up approach? Would we be supporting better from a top down?
I think it's probably a combination of those things. I haven't got any research to support what I'm about to say here, but I'll say it out loud because I think my observations would be that neurodivergent people in general, and I suspect this is true across all industries, but including education, rise to leadership posts quite easily because of their systems, methodologies, seeking to do things well, wanting evidence-based approaches and so on. I think they then struggle to understand how to lead relationally well organisations. It's just I just throw that out there as a pattern that I'd love to have with Chris Benson. So that's just a reflection of the thought, but I haven't got any data to support that. However, back to your question, top down. I think it depends what you mean by top down. Again, I'd like to know what Chris is thinking there. Top down for me again would be top down in terms of understanding and training and that ability to be curious and empathise. I think that's very important. I wouldn't necessarily suggest top down is the best approach in any process of developing improved practice in schools. I think the most distributive model of leadership is generally speaking, in my experience, the best, because then you can co-produce. My point about co-production earlier, and work together. But certainly top down in terms of culture, establishing a culture where it's safe, emotionally safe, for somebody to say, "I am struggling, and I do things differently." And to know that if I ask that conversation, if I seek to have that conversation with a line manager, I'm going to be taken on a journey that's going to be of mutual benefit, rather than if I have that conversation with my line manager, I'm going to be sent to occupational health and then put on, this capability journey. That's two very different. But I think a neurodivergent person would need to know that there's going to be sufficient understanding in my line manager that that's going to be a safe conversation to have. But if I have a line manager, and ironically, that line manager themselves may be neurodiverse, but if they haven't had that training, but training needs to go deeper into that. Training's gone deep in my understanding of neurodivergence. I would need to know that exists in the psyche of that line manager, so that I can know that I've got a healthy conversation to have there. I guess top down in terms of, okay, let's have a really intentional and publicly visible neurodiversity policy approach to working with staff. That might be really helpful. In terms of, we've done our research, we've got specialist trainers in at a leadership level to help us figure out what does an autism friendly staffing structure look like. What does an autism friendly learning environment look like for adults? What does an autism friendly staff room look like? So here's a classic example. Is it okay in an office? This isn't a school thing now, but let's say you're in an office space and in a business. Is it okay to stand up and wander around the room every 5 minutes? Even if there's unwritten rules, and this is another thing. We haven't talked about this, but there's unwritten rules all over the world, in every setting, in every social situation, every business. And the same in every school. I can walk into different schools, and I think I'm intuitive enough now to sense the kind of culture that's going on there. But I can guarantee you can walk into a staff room in one school and a staff room in another school 6 miles up the road, and you'll sense unwritten rules about who sits where, what the systems for sharing coffee mugs is. Silly little examples, but if you blow that up to actually how we work together, what a meeting looks like, how a meeting is run, how co-productive is the meeting? Can I really express my own opinions? Can I challenge? Is it safe here to challenge what's been presented to us? Am I being dictated to the steps towards that end goal, or are we actually going to collaborate and work together on how we get towards that end goal? So I think, top down in terms of our leaders creating a healthy culture where it's safe. for these conversations to happen. And I will agree with Chris in the sense that in every setting, every school, the head teacher or whoever is, there's different roles now, CEOs and executive heads or heads of school, whatever title you've got, whoever's leading that school does set the culture.
Yes.
And you can tell the difference when they're in the building or not in the building even. I was told once, even when I was a deputy head, actually, in a large special school, we can always tell, Cole, whether you're in the building or not. I thought that's really interesting. So why is that? People behave differently, they said. And then we had a conversation around, what do you mean that people behave differently? Well, they, some of it was around, following expectations around how we adapt practices for children, some things, and maybe when you're not in the building, there's a bit of laxness, and while the cat's away. So that was one part of the conversation, but another part of the conversation was specifically around culture. And actually, when you're in the building, we feel more emotionally secure. That was basically what they were saying. We know your expectations, and we know that you will be collaborative, and we know that you'll problem solve with us. But when you're not in the building, the other line manager, that they didn't want to name and shame, there was a different culture, different expectations.
It's so important, isn't it? That's what's coming up to me, is that the culture of it being, a safe, inclusive, encouraging space. And you'll know as well, Cole, that the world of work can be quite a challenging place for those who are neurodivergent, with almost trying to fall in line with certain systems and recognizing that actually there is a difference there. We do have strengths that are played out in different ways, and having that supported. And as well as with the staff, there's huge amounts of pressure with teachers in terms of, the work that they take home with them as well. And like you're saying, like meeting certain targets and stuff like that, that it does really highlight to me, like you're saying, this could be replicated in every business, every organization, that whoever is in the leadership role or like you're saying, the head teacher, they set the culture. So for me, what's coming up is a real importance here of having the awareness, but also recognizing the environment that is set is going to have a huge impact on outcomes. It's going to have a huge impact on staff's mental health, which will then impact on a business or impact on an education. So this is really important, actually, having the awareness and being able to support those with neurodivergence is going to be really important.
Yeah. And being secure within yourself. So as a leader, what kind of leader do you want to be? Is it an important question? There's all sorts of leadership models out there and different, but at a very basic level, do you want to be a relational person who can actually help people travel with you to somewhere really good? Or is effective leadership in your mind authoritarian and dictatorial? And you'll know as well as anyone who's worked in any workplace anywhere, you can tell the difference straight away. But typically, in my mind, the dictatorial leader is less secure within themselves, whereas a really effective leader is secure enough to know that they don't know all the answers, but their job is to actually get the best out of the complex range of people they find themselves working with. And that's at all levels. You just think about, without naming any, but think about different presidents of different countries. If you look at how Nelson Mandela and his biography and what people said about his leadership style, and compare that to, say, Margaret Thatcher or Donald Trump or Barack Obama, there's a lot to be learned from being secure within yourself as a leader, in order to understand how to get the best out of the people you are trying to lead.
Definitely. What would you say, Cole, if I asked you this question of what are some, I know you've gone over a few of them actually, but to kind of tie everything and to leave the listeners and the viewers with something here, like, what are some practical things then that you feel you're able to share that people listening or watching, they can take away to their workplace or their share, whether people that are listening here are head teachers, they're in leadership, or they're colleagues and they want to be able to support their colleagues better in the workplace? What are some practical things that you feel you might be able to share?
Yeah. So, as you've suggested, I'd like to summarise some of the points I have made. So, just really important, I think, is culture. And I've broken that down to 3 steps, really. So, a culture of curiosity, define the principles first, and then align your systems and processes to that. And don't allow the systems and processes to drive themselves. And to sense check as you're going, because even once you've set systems and processes up, to constantly review them in terms of are these systems still helping us achieve the principles that we laid out, or are the systems now taking over? No, statements like, well, this is our way, this is how we do things here. Okay, great, but why are we doing things this way? Oh, right, actually it's because. So as part of that, so just to really emphasize this, I think it's really important that leaders, employers, are really, really clear about the why behind expectations, rather than just the expectations in the system. Well, I've just do it because I've told you to do it by this deadline. Now, for a neurodivergent brain, and we haven't touched on that sense of justice. But if we understand the why behind things, we're far more likely to find that inner drive to be absolutely all in and support it. And it's not an intentional drive to be disobedient. It's just confusion, and actually masking. So am I putting all my mental energies into completing tasks for reasons that I don't quite know why I'm doing them? Or am I putting that same energy into something that I know is serving a real clear moral principle and purpose? That's really crucial, I think. There's a phrase in the education setting is, whatever you do for pupils with SEND is likely to help everybody. An adaptive practice, using visuals, for example, helping children to learn vocabulary. Or if you're going to do it just for pupils with SEND, do it for everybody, because it'll help everybody gain information and remember things. So the same principle here. Don't just make it an adaptation, make it part of the culture for everybody. But we're going to be really clear about the why behind things. So I'll give you one clear example. When I was a head teacher, I wanted to make some changes around how we deployed staff. So I stuck a photograph of a child that we all knew on the screen on the wall. And I asked the staff a question: how many different adults do you think this child has to navigate and communicate with between Monday and Friday? And we all guessed and blah blah blah. 6, 8, whatever. Anyway, and then I gradually relieved, as a PowerPoint slide, showed all the different adults, and there were 26.
Wow!
So this was a pre-verbal child with cerebral palsy sat in a supported seating chair. So communication difficulties, etc. And he was dealing with 26 adults between Monday and Friday. And then we were asking ourselves, why was he struggling to make progress? Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So I unpicked with the staff principles first, and then introduced the change of staffing structure that I was proposing. And there was absolutely not a single dissenting voice in what was something that they've been doing for almost 20 years. Now, if I just introduce the change because I've decided as a leader this is what we're going to do, there's a difference there. So principles first, and the why behind things. The point I made earlier about shame, be awareness of the shame factor, and just to create a culture where this is a workplace where there's no shame has no place here. Shame has no place here, because I think that will help everybody and enable those difficult conversations to happen in a safe, emotionally safe environment. I'd recommend that. Therapeutic approaches. One of the top tips, for people with ADHD, for example, typically medication is offered for focus and seen to be the fix. But there is research out there that suggests that talking therapy is just as effective for people with ADHD in order to deal with the issues that we talked around shame, being late all the time, all these sorts of things. But actually, therapeutic approaches can be integrated into our systems and processes without necessarily having to employ a therapist on a one-to-one basis. So, here's an idea from employers in schools: employ, credible, trained therapists and psychologists to inform our practice and review our practice on how we work together as a team. What are our approaches? Do we have system approaches and policies? So, for example, what does a neurodivergent friendly appraisal policy actually look like? And get therapeutic input into those policies so that the systems are actually principles based, as well as ticking all the legal boxes that we need to cover. And I've got a really practical thing here, really practical for individuals, whether you're a leader or employer or employee, and that is get your diary sorted. So now, what I mean by that is wrestle with systems and processes until you find a point that you get a system that works for you. So let me just describe but it's my system that works for me. Okay. So the underlying principle here, so practice what I preach. The underlying principle is the system doesn't drive how I work. The underlying principle is that I really struggle to retain information. I'll forget things. And I need a system. The principle is that I need a system that allow my brain to calm down and relax about the things that are left undone. Okay, so there's a principle, all right? So my system is this: I no longer use lists. All right, so lists work really well for some people. So please, if that works for you, carry on. Don't stop doing it. I no longer have lists. I use just the typical electronic diary now. So anything that needs to be done, big task or small task, important task or insignificant task, it goes into my diary as a block of time. So, for example, a low-level task, ring my friend Corey this afternoon at 4:00. It's not on a list. It's been allocated as a block of time. 4:00 to 4:30 this afternoon. Now, if I get to 4:00, 4:30 this afternoon, and something's come at me from the side, which typically happens in schools, parental complaints or a child's upset or whatever it is, something's come at you. In the past, what would have happened is that I wouldn't have completed that task, and the shame kicks in. I've failed. I've got to work longer. I've got to stay later. And in the past, I might have been in school 10:00 at night, and I'm not joking. No, you would see me in my classroom 10:00 at night sometimes. Whereas now, I can shift, I can slide that task to another day, and it hasn't disappeared. So psychologically, in my mind, everything I need to remember doesn't have to be here anymore. It's in my diary. And even if it has to be shifted, it's not disappeared. It's been delegated to a future date. So my brain at the end of the day can relax and say to itself, it's okay. I know I haven't done it, but it will be done. It will be done, And I can't tell you what a difference that has made. So I do that now for all my important task as well as my insignificant or low level tasks. So it looks like a very colourful jigsaw puzzle, but it's a jigsaw puzzle that's ever evolving, that has given me the structure and the framework to cope with life, to be kind to myself, to be organised. I still make mistakes. I still double book from time to time, but I don't double book now. I used to double book almost every day. And I do remember my head teacher, when I was just a classroom teacher, saying to me, literally, Cole, get yourself a diary, get yourself organised. But I've figured out that by doing things this way, I am much better organised. And I think over the whole of this year, I've only double booked, I think, 3 times rather than every single day in the past. And the release from lists, incompleted lists, is just really phenomenal.
Yeah, I like that, because that tip there, because like you said, when you have a list, when you look at a list, it can feel very overwhelming, because it's still in your mind. You're having to think, okay, when am I doing that? But actually, you kind of cut all of that out by allocating, like you're saying, the day, the time, and you can move that. If, like you're saying, if you don't get round to it or something comes at you from the side, you can move that rather than it having the message of you didn't do this, you failed.
Yeah,
and shame.
Absolutely. And with the ADHD brain, I might get to a piece of work that I've allocated. So, for example, in the summer holidays, my diary's full of tasks of planning that I'm going to do, but I know what's going to happen. I'll get to a particular day, and I won't be ready to start that task. But again, I can just shift it, and that will be okay. I can give myself permission to shift it to later in the day. Do you know what? I'm going to go to the gym so that I can get that sensory regulation work done, and then I'm probably be in a better frame of mind. And maybe at 11 o'clock, I'll be better ready to start. So again, I can shift it around rather than feel the shame and then be paralysed.
Yeah,
staring at the screen, trying to force myself to do this task, and it takes me hours and hours and hours. Whereas actually, do you know what? I go for a run, go for a gym, slide it to later in the day, and then suddenly the hyperfocus will kick in, and I'll complete that same task in an hour instead of 5 hours.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that, Cole. That's really helpful, and I'm sure there's people listening and watching that will take a lot away from that, from what you've shared today as well. And go on, because I know I wanted
just one more thing is true. So again, ADHD brain, something on my list I haven't forgotten. Can I just mention that? I'll just throw it out there. There's a scheme for all employers called Disability Confidence Scheme. It's a government thing. You can sign up for it. I'd recommend all organisations commit to becoming disability confident employers. And explore that. So can I just leave that there?
Of course, that's really important. That's really important, because we'll put that some of that information down as well. Like if anyone wants to read that in the description as well. But lastly, Cole, if anyone out there wants to contact you, wants to find out what you're doing, what you offer, and get involved, or just get in contact with you.
Yeah, just get in touch. So my business is called Vigeo. That's Vigeo. Vigeo Partners. Vigeo, by the way, means to thrive, to flourish, and to be productive. So it's vigeopartners.org. Please shoot me a message. Have a look at seeing what the kind of things I do. So I do a lot of coaching, one-to-one groups, predominantly in education because that's my experience and background. But I work with anybody. But also on the back of today, if you look at my free resources section, there's not much there yet, but there's definitely a section there that might be useful for anybody working with or who is somebody with a diagnosis of ADHD. Really practical strategies that might be helpful to reflect on as a parent, as an individual, or as an employer. So feel free to have a look at that and see if that will be helpful to you.
That sounds good. I definitely recommend. I've had a look, and the services that you offer, Cole, is definitely needed, and it's amazing service out there. And I think with your experience as well, the level of empathy that you offer and that you can offer is amazing. So if anyone is out there, then please check out Cole Andrew on Vigeo. But Cole, thank you so much for your time today and sharing on the NeuroGrowth podcast. But we'd love to have you back, because I know there's more for us to talk about. There's more experiences.
That'd be great. Yeah, look forward to it. Yeah.
So so please check out Vigeo, and also stay locked in for the next episode. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.